Good afternoon, magandang hapon sa lahat. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Sarah Keblatin. The webinar is a response to our climate vulnerability, food security needs, and our need for economic recovery from the pandemic. The Roundtable is a series of conversations and exchanges between the Philippine and Dutch specialists and organizations on designing regenerative systems. It is an inquiry how we can design our solutions through a shift from a sustainable to a more regenerative approach to meet the changes the country is facing today and the uncertain future to come, especially as we have 10 years left to avoid irreparable damage caused by the climate crisis. Just to introduce ourselves, Green Releaf is an organization working in regenerative solutions in communities affected by disasters and displacement, and is also enabling ecosystems of regenerative initiatives through our regeneration labs for circular economies, regenerative agriculture, and one that's coming up on ecosystem restoration. We are organizing this together with our partners, the Food Gardens Movement, a national movement to promote local food production with support from the Embassy of the Netherlands in the Philippines and our partner Commonland Foundation. This is co-presented by the organizations represented by the speakers today, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the Oscar Lopez Center, Wetlands International, the Office of Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, Down to Earth Farms, with gratitude to Little Rock Entertainment for hosting the technicals for this event. Today's topic on regenerative ecosystems is the first of a series of dialogues with topics that would cover regenerative agriculture and regenerative economies in the next few months. Before we proceed, I would like to invite everyone to type their names, organizations, and locations on the chat so we can introduce each other and get to know who is attending this session. And while we're doing that, we acknowledge the presence of our key speakers and panelists and attendees from the Philippine and Dutch governments, businesses, and members of the civil society. Welcome. We have over 100, almost 150 registrants for this event today, so we are grateful to have a big audience. While we're typing in, and as people are summarizing where the people are located, we just want to remind for Zoom attendees to ensure a seamless program, your microphones are on mute by default, and the recipients of chat messages are limited to the panelists only. For easier filtering, we have enabled the Q&A feature. When you have questions, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the window, of the Zoom window, to ask any questions, and we will try and answer them during the Q&A portion. So I'd like to ask some people in the team to acknowledge the locations where people are from. We see people from Manila, And I'd like to invite people to help me look at the list as well. From Tarlac, we have Region 9, people from the government, NGOs. Great to hear and see everybody here from the Netherlands Embassy, yeah. And then Davao, farmers, farming groups. Later, we have Energy Development Corporation. We have people from the PUM Netherlands, Mountain Province, all the way to Makati. So it's a big scope. We have Sorsogon. Somebody showed me a map of the Philippines, and it is actually the size of, from Denmark all the way to Italy. So if you can imagine the scope of our country and the locations where people are, it's almost from the north to south. It's of El Nido, and then we have Manila. So biodiversity specialists, we have conservationists, government, business people here. Thank you for joining us. So I just want to go to the next slide, just to give us, this powerful image of this. I think it's I would say a normal image we see after every disaster in the country. And this one is just from the recent typhoons that just hit us last November. So this webinar is because we face this reality as the most vulnerable country in the world facing multiple climate hazards. And our inquiry for this webinar is to explore how might we enable climate resilient ecosystems to address our climate vulnerability while meeting our needs for food security and economic recovery from the pandemic. And to give you a run through of the show, I'm going to go through the program scope. We will start with an opening from DENR's ASEC Ricardo Calderon and Ambassador Saskia de Lang of the Netherlands Embassy in the Philippines, to be followed by our first panel on enabling large-scale climate resilient ecosystems with Dr. Rodel Lasco from Oscar Lopez Center and Willem Ferweda from Commonland Foundation. The next panel will be with Attorney Ipat Luna from the Office of Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda and Dr. Annadel Cabanban of Wetlands International. And we will close this event with an inspiring message from Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, Commissioner for Global Commission and Adaptation and the House Deputy Speaker and Representative to the Lone District of Antique from the House of Representatives. And so to officially open this event, I'm introducing Benjamin Bernabella, a Dutch citizen living in the Philippines and co-founder of Cabanban Organic, which is part of our Regenerative Agriculture Lab. And he will be presenting all our speakers today. And over to you, Benjamin, to introduce the first speakers.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today. I'm very excited for the event. And yes, I'm very happy right now to introduce Assistant Secretary for Climate Change and Director of the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. He has been the Philippine representative on forestry at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the focal person on the Forest United Nations Forum. And he is the governing council member of the ASEAN Republic of Cooperation on Forestry and the coordinator of the Philippines National Greening Program. Let's welcome Assistant Secretary Ricardo L. Calderon.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be invited in this kind of roundtable discussion, specially organized by our very active young partners from Green Releaf Initiative. Of course, to the members of the panel, I won't say the names already, but many of my colleagues are there. Dr. Lasco is my doormate from way back 1970s. And Atty. Ipat is a colleague from the DNR. To the participants all over the country, good afternoon, a pleasant afternoon, everyone. Year 2020 is considered a year of reckoning. Some say that COVID-19 pandemic is quite an equalizer. It spares no one, affecting all races, creed, and country. Managing the virus requires resources. Herein lies the myth of parity. Rich nations and individuals have better access to healthcare, while poor countries will have to bear the brunt harder. All the while, we are at it. Biodiversity plays a central role in this chaos. Zoonotic diseases emanate from disturbance of wildlife and their habitats, from harsh and unsanitary livestock trade, and from human imprudence. Though economically struggling, we are a megadiverse country. The Philippines hosts a great concentration of unique species per unit area in the world, and we say the solutions are in nature. Biodiversity underpins not only the economy, but also our collective well-being. The health crisis we are experiencing now may find its solution in nature. Citing the UN, and I quote, 4 billion people rely on natural medicines for their health, and 70% of cancer drugs are derived from or are inspired by nature, end quote. The Philippines is currently undertaking research studies on the viability of several nature-based solutions or medicines. Virgin coconut oil, lagundi, tawa-tawa are some of the few that are being targeted for COVID cure. But we must utilize biodiversity properly, responsibly, and sustainably. We must ensure biological resources are governed equitably for equitable access, providing positive incentive guarantees, co-benefits for biodiversity, economies, and societies. Hence, we are here today to discuss regenerative ecosystems. This roundtable discussion is very relevant, very timely. 2020 is not just about COVID-19. We were also severely hammered by 5 devastatingly consecutive typhoons, starting from Quinta, Rolly, Shoni, Tony, Tonyo, and then Ulysses. Our natural ecosystems, specifically our forests, our wetlands, and our protected areas, can no longer bear the impact of years of degradation, neglect, and climate change. Our communities are vulnerable. The risks and hazards are increasing. We need to scale up our capacities to be able to cope up with these natural challenges. We at the DNR, together with other government agencies, are now working on the Build Back Better Action Plan for Cagayan River Basin, for Marikina River Basin, and for Bicol River Basin. Strict enforcement of laws or extractive activities, especially along easement and environmentally critical areas, shall be planned to be implemented. We will continue the rehabilitation and restoration of our impaired ecosystems, especially our forests, our protected areas, to ensure that we sustain our survival. We cannot do it alone from the DNR. We are calling on you, our partners, to work with us. When you see wildlife poach or traffic, kindly report. When trees are cut indiscriminately, please report. But also help us plant again and regain the ecosystem that have been lost through the years. When you see trash clogging our storage, please pick it up and avoid disposables. Turn off electricity when not in use. Eat locally sourced food and reuse, recycle. We can all do our share, no matter how simple they may be, but it is always a step, a contribution. Let us keep the circle of life green and thriving. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Thank you.
We now move on to Ambassador Saskia Delang, and to be introduced to Benjamin.
Great, thank you. Yes, it is indeed my great pleasure today to introduce the ambassador of my country, the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to the Philippines. She has over 30 years of diplomatic experience as ambassador of the Netherlands to Uganda and Mali. She has been an advisor to the Director General for International Cooperation of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Special Envoy for Energy and Energy Security, and the Netherlands Ambassador at Large and head of the EU delegation to the Republic of the Congo. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Ambassador Saskia Delang.
This afternoon, I'm very honored to be in such a distinguished group and for such a timely occasion with this webinar on regenerative and sustainable activities. I'm very, very glad to be with you. And first of all, I would like to start by wishing you and your families my personal best, because it's, I think, for all of us, difficult times. And so the regenerative ecosystems for climate resilience and pandemic recovery is a very timely issue. First of all, special thanks to all our speakers, to Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, who is the congressional representative for the Lone District of Antique. She's also commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation, which is a commission that has been initiated by the Netherlands together with the United Nations. Thank you also to Assistant Secretary Ricardo Calderon, the Director for the Biodiversity Management Bureau at DNR, Dr. Rodel Lasco, Executive Director of the Oscar Lopez Center, and Mr. Willem Ferweda, CEO of Commonland in the Netherlands. Also welcome to Atty. Ipat Luna, environmental lawyer, and to Annadel Cabanban, the Philippines country representative of Wetlands International. And also thank you to our moderators, Sarah Quibelatin, the co-founder and executive director of Green Releaf, and to Attorney Paula Aberasturi, the environmental consultant and proprietor of Down to Earth Farms. The Philippines is among the countries most vulnerable to environmental disasters, and these calamities will only get more severe with climate change. Moreover, we are still coping with the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. These issues have now compounded, resulting to strain on the country's food resources and on its economic insecurity to the country's growing population. Improving the agri-food sector is at the forefront of the government's socio-economic response in its adaptation and in its recovery efforts. Today's sessions are about enabling large-scale climate-resilient ecosystems and about pandemic and climate solutions through biodiversity conservation. The intention is to share perspectives from both the Philippines and the Netherlands that will highlight the value of disaster risk reduction via nature-based solutions. We believe that disasters are not a fatality, but that we can work at preventing them preferably by building with nature and not against nature. Through this virtual platform, we are glad to be able to bring together various organizations to share their views and initiatives on promoting the shift from sustainable to regenerative systems and to address food and nutrition security, along with climate resiliency. At this point, I would like to acknowledge the Embassy's partners, Green Releaf Initiative, Commonland, and Food Gardens Movement. They are making this webinar possible. And I'm looking forward to the presentations, but unfortunately, I will not be able to attend all of them due to other engagement that I have later on this afternoon. But I wish you all fruitful exchanges, and I hope that they will help you to design future policies. Salamat po. And over to the moderator.
Maraming salamat. Thank you so much, Ambassador Delan. Thank you for the warm welcome from the Netherlands and from the Philippines, and the shared commitments to address our climate vulnerability and pandemic challenges in the country. Now we move forward to our first panel on enabling large-scale climate resilience ecosystems. In this panel, we explore how might we approach large-scale land restoration from a systemic collaboration across sectors that impact sociocultural, economic, and ecological dimensions of development. I invite Benjamin to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Sarah. Our first speaker is a multi-awarded scientist with more than 35 years of experience at the national and international level. He is the author of over 80 technical publications on the conservation of natural resources, on climate change and land degradation, and several reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. In 2007, he was a co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for the IPCC. He also serves as the Philippines coordinator of the World Agroforestry Center. Please welcome Dr. Rodel Lasco.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and good afternoon to all of you. And let me now share my screen as I start my presentation. So again, I'm delighted to be part of this forum today, and I thank the organizers for inviting us to share some of our thoughts when it comes to enhancing resilience, especially of our ecosystems. Just for a few seconds, let me just say we are a privately funded foundation. We're a nonprofit, and we were founded because of the vision of this person, Mr. Oscar M. Lopez, knowing that the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. He realized that science-based solutions are needed, and thus the foundation, the Oscar M. Lopez Center Foundation, was established. Now, going to my talk, let me just briefly highlight some of the important findings of two important reports, which many of you are familiar. Last year, the IPCC released a special report on land and a special report on oceans and the cryosphere. The first report is all about land, the impacts of climate change on land systems. And one of the findings of this study or of this synthesis is that, first of all, this covers climate change and how it relates to things like desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, part of our topic today, and other related issues. And perhaps, well, at least to me, one of the summary figures of this report is this one, showing how when temperature increases from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees, that is the y-axis, and then on the x-axis, you see there different land-based processes that will be affected, including, for example, dry land water scarcity from the left, soil erosion, and vegetation loss, very important in a country like the Philippines, and all the way to the right, tropical crop yields, as well as food supply instabilities. And just to generalize this graph, what this is showing is that at 1.5 And also, especially at 2 degrees, the risks will become increasingly higher in all of these processes. And we understand, therefore, why the Paris Agreement, the target of 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees, is so important to the resilience of our natural systems. We can see here, for example, that vegetation loss, wildlife damage, the risk will be much higher starting at 2 degrees and onwards, of course, to 3, 4, and even 5 degrees. So these are the kinds of temperatures that models are predicting that our Earth will have in the next 100 years or till the end of the century. Again, just to cite an example on that report, we have here wildfire damage on the left, food supply instabilities on the right, and you see there close up how at 2 degrees there will be increasing risks. The color is redder as temperature increases, and on food supply instabilities, basically the same, even earlier at 1.5 and even before 1.5, increasing risk as well. And again, taking note that we have already increased the world's temperature by almost 1 degree relative to about 1850s, the start of the Industrial Revolution. So we have basically, eaten up our allowance of 1.5 degrees increase, because right now we're already at 1.5 or already almost 1 degree centigrade warming. But at the same time, the report highlights that there are response options. Again, I won't detail this, but just to realize a lot of the response options that will have positive benefits on mitigation, on adaptation, desertification, and others, many of them are what we are doing in the Philippines. If you see there on the column there, on the left-hand column, agroforestry is there. In forest management, we have reducing deforestation and forest degradation, and including improved forest management. A lot of these things we are doing, and we have here ASEC Rick Calderon of DNR. They're they're at the forefront of these activities that we are doing right now in the Philippines. And so the report tells us that coordinated action is so important. We cannot do this alone, or one department or ministry is not enough. We need to simultaneously improve, according to the report, land, food security, and nutrition, and of course, to help and hunger as well. And so coordinated response is so necessary. We cannot do it alone. We have to work together. And better land management can play its part in tackling climate change, but it cannot do it all. In other words, it has a role, very important role to play. A lot of carbon or greenhouse gas emissions coming from land use change and land management. But at the same time, even if we do everything we could, it cannot do it all. We still need to address fossil fuel emissions in the other sectors. And so quickly shifting now to the other report that came out, which is all about oceans and cryosphere. And in this report, again, just really one or two highlights. Here is an example of the severe impact of climate change on ocean ecosystems. And just directing your attention to the bottom panel of this graph, letter C, maximum fisheries catch potential. And if you look at our part of the world, and this is towards the end of this century, if you look at our part of the world here, the fish catch, the maximum catch potential for fish will decline by up to 30, 40% relative to, more or less today. So that's huge. Like a country like the Philippines, 7,000 islands, archipelagic, more than 50% of the people residing in coastal zones. Imagine 30, 40% decline of fisheries catch in these or in countries like the Philippines. And similar to the impact on land systems, the oceans report also included an impact on various ecosystems. Warm water corals, you can see even at 1 degree. In other words, right now, where we are, even at 1 degree, already negative impacts, bleaching, higher acidity of the ocean, warming oceans, all of those leading to the destruction of corals, one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. And you can read on and see this chart if you're interested in the IPCC report. And well, in this chart, sorry, it's a bit busy, and you may not all see this very clearly, but in this middle or upper middle chart, this is just showing that adaptation is very important. With adaptation, the risks are much lower. That is capital R. These are like twin bar charts. On the left is smaller r, sorry, without adaptation. And on the right side is with adaptation. And you can see for most of these, the risk will be lower if there is adaptation. And so the message of this IPCC report, we need to adapt, we need to act so we can address the impacts of climate change. And so just trying to end my presentation, I just would like to present to you how we can foster climate resilience. What are we doing? And I'm talking from experience, our experience as the Oscar M. Lopez Center. What are the things we have been doing, trying to enhance the resilience of our ecosystems and our people? So here's an example of one quick research we did early part of the year. We know that we are in the midst of the pandemic, but then sometime March, April, we were thinking as the first typhoon approaches, you remember that was Typhoon Ambo. We were thinking, this is a twin disaster. You have a lot of people affected by COVID, and here's a typhoon. And so we asked the question, if we overlay the typhoon path, the projected typhoon path before it struck, and overlay that with the density of those affected by COVID, then we will have a better understanding of how the typhoon will affect COVID-affected communities, and hopefully be able to forewarn them and prepare in advance for this coming, one disaster overlaying even more misery to the people affected by COVID. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Okay, now, the other thing I'd like to share with you is that one of the things we're doing to enhance resilience is to work with our partners, Climate Change Commission, Pag-asa, even including the DNR, as I'll share later, to synthesize available scientific information so that our people will have access to this information. So on the left side, we have our 3-part series or reports, similar to the IPCC reports, distilling the results of scientific research, including on forest, marine systems, and human systems. And on the right side, 2 reports that we produce with Pag-asa, again, synthesizing what's been happening to our climate over the years. So again, an example of how we can use science information and make this more readily available to potential users. And all of these are available freely in our website. Anyone can download all of this. And recently, just last year, we worked with the DNR, again, with support from the UNDP, and we tried to assess the implications of 1.5 degree warming and higher to DNR's top 10 priority programs. So we look at those 10 priority programs, and we try to tease out, we try to identify the key impacts and how those programs can be modified to make them more resilient to a warming planet. And then again, another example with the private sector, we sponsored lectures. We invited experts in business and climate change, and we invited the top senior management from various companies in the Philippines, and to give them a better idea of how climate change could affect their operations and what to do with them. We also work with the Climate Change Commission on this is budget tagging, trying to help them prioritize and put some logic based on climate impacts and vulnerabilities, and how funding can be allocated in a more rational way. So this is our way of helping our Department of Budget, the Climate Change Commission, in targeting funding to the most vulnerable systems in the country. And we are also working with partners, including the Earth Observatory of Singapore, this time tackling and trying to find out how sea level rise could happen in the Philippines, what are the impacts, and what we could do about it. So this is just starting as I speak, and hopefully in the next few months and years, we will have more to tell you about this research. And finally, we've also been working on communication. We realize that science cannot just exist in a vacuum. We have to, let the readers, potential users, and even the youth and lay people to understand what's happening. So we partnered with the DocuCentral of the ABS-CBN network, and we produced this docufilm, which incidentally won an award at the U.S. International Film and Video Festival this year. And here in this film, we brought together scientists and lay people as they talk about the dangers, the risks, the experiences they had on climate hazards. And just a few weeks ago, we finished a climate festival for the youth with the Climate Change Commission realizing, as in the words of Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, that film, this KFF, Climate Film Festival, a powerful platform that will encourage the youth to be united and become the center of climate action, realizing that the future action will come from the youth. They will inherit the future world, and they are also an important part of the solution in enhancing resilience to climate change. So with this, I'm looking forward to interacting with all of you. Thank you for your listening. Good afternoon to you. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Lasco. That was very informative, and also, despite scary, but also giving us a little bit of optimism of what we can do. And we're gonna go to the next speaker, Willem Ferweda from Commonland, and we will be introducing him before he starts.
Yes, indeed. Our next speaker on this panel on enabling large-scale climate resilient ecosystems is the Chief Executive Officer of Commonland. He founded Commonland in 2013 together with the Erasmus University and the Commission on Ecosystem Management of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Commonland is an organization based in the Netherlands that is active worldwide to promote sustainable development through the restoration of large degraded land areas. In 2016, he was awarded first place in the Sustainable 100, a list of Dutch people with the most influence on the environment and sustainability. He developed the 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years, a holistic framework for ecological restoration by people and business for the next generations, which was published by the Erasmus University. Let us welcome my fellow countryman, Sir Willem Ferweda.
So, good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here, or good afternoon, sorry, good morning for me, good afternoon probably for the rest. It's great to be here and to listen to the great presentations of also Dr. Rodel Lasco, and thanks Sarah Keblatin and all the others for inviting me to this very important webinar. Yeah, I would like to show you a little bit about our work and how we have created a framework that hopes to be an enabler for large-scale ecosystem restoration. So I will put on my slides and share them with you. I hope you can all see them. So basically, we started Commonland, which is a non-profit organization, in 2013. And Benjamin, you're correct. It was founded by IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management and the Rotterdam School of Management, so a business school and a group of ecologists worldwide. My former track record is in the conservation world. I was director of IUCN in the Netherlands for many years, and I've been studying tropical ecology in Latin America and lived there for quite a while in Colombia to work on conservation and restoration. But actually, I wanted to change something. You know, the conservation world is super important, but it also receives limited sources of funding, and it is still considered as a kind of a luxury, while we all know that biodiversity is probably one of the most important things of the world. We've seen it in the former presentation. And summarizing the importance of biodiversity, I would always like to say biodiversity decreases risks and increases resilience. And we've seen it, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with all the things that are connected to biodiversity. Yeah, I don't need to tell anything or explain you anything about extreme weather events in the Philippines. You are the most professional experiences of extreme weather events. But overgrazing, infrastructure building, food security, climate change, you know, the energy transition, for instance, droughts, soil, migration, it's all part of this big game. And of course, let's not forget pandemics. So biodiversity is critical to everything. And actually it is one of the, you could say, the underlying part of our economic existence and well-being. We also know that lots of costs are associated to the degradation of ecosystems. We are aware, and many sources like the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, UNEP, many professionals have calculated the immense impact of degradation from a people health perspective, but also, of course, from a GDP or economic perspective. And all those figures shows us that the loss of forest, wetlands, marine ecosystems, etc., are not only from a biodiversity point of view very sad, but from an economic point of view, there are huge costs associated with that. The beauty, of course, is that we also know that we can reverse ecosystem degradation basically with two things. We can restore ecosystems, like this case in the central high plains of China, the Loess Plateau, an area in the Yellow River Basin, an area the size of France. I don't know how big that is for the Philippines, but I'm sure France is smaller than the Philippines. So a very big area, you could say. And they started to restore that area several years ago, first with the grant and the loans from the World Bank. And step by step, the Chinese are reforesting this place that was deforested for decades and decades due to overgrazing, and also by building up an iron and a steel industry. So two things. Ecosystem restoration is critical, and of course, conservation. These two things are probably the most important things we need to do for the coming decades or in this century. But to capture to capture restoration at a landscape level is a tough job because there are people living there. And we need to think big, as we all know, because ecology works better if we think at least in thousands and thousands of hectares. And when I was working at IUCN, I realized that it was always very difficult to find a kind of a language bridge between government officials, between bankers and the finance industry, the business world, especially in the agro, tech and food and mining businesses, and the conservation world and the farmers who are living there. So there was a gap. People didn't understand each other. There was a lot of jargon that people were using from the different silo situations where they came from. And I realized that if we cannot create a language and a framework that is understood by everybody in such a landscape, but also scientifically, correct, then it will be super difficult to restore large areas, because there are people living there with different land tenure situations, There are different governmental legal issues there and provinces. So we need to create a language and a framework. And that was the moment when I left my former job at IUCN and decided to take a sabbatical and actually interview farmers and investors all around the globe. And that's what I did in 2012. And I asked them two questions. What is the biggest frustration you have, and what is the biggest dream? And for farmers and people on rural areas, especially in degraded lands, their biggest frustration was that they couldn't live anymore from the lands, and actually they were bound to migrate. And their dream was that they would love to have vivid communities in those landscapes with a good balance between ecology and productivity. While for the investors, the biggest frustration was that their kids actually increasingly were telling them that they were investing in the wrong things, like the oil industry or mining industry, in these kind of things, to make a lot of profit for shareholders or pensionados. And their kids said, hey, listen, Dad, if you increase the investments in these kinds of industries, at the end, the planet will go down, and there's not much left for our future. So they had a conflict of, you could say, of generations. While the biggest dream was to find investments that were positive, not less bad, but good. And that was a challenge, and still is, of course. So I decided to look into, can I create a kind of a framework that is practical, based on ecosystem science, and also make use of business cases, probably different business cases. And what I always like is that it means that we need to think more holistically. And what is that? I mean, we are people, we are human beings, we are part of the biodiversity, we came out of biodiversity and nature. So we need to move a little bit more away from, let's say, the ego part on your left side of the screen to a more kind of eco part, more a circle part. But how to deal with that in a language and tool setting, in a KPI framework, and taking into consideration that we need to think in business development as well. So let me give you an overview of what I try to do. So when you go to those degraded areas, and there are many of them in the world, probably double the size of China, two areas of, an area the size of 2 billion hectares that are increasingly very degraded, and people are migrating to cities because they can't live there anymore. What you see in those areas is that you find out that if you talk to people and look how the landscape looks like, that you see 4 losses. And the most important loss, what I've realized is when you speak to those people, is that they have lost their purpose and hope. Quite often, of course, they lost their security and employment. That's the second loss. The third loss is, the landscape is degraded. So loss of biodiversity, topsoil washed away, water is a problem, vegetation cover, you name it, all associated to biodiversity. And the last loss is no more economic activities that are sound and rural applicable. So I call that the effect of maximization of return on investment per hectare. If you go to business schools, people teach you maximization of return on investment is the best thing you can do to build a company. But if you apply maximization of return on investment and add 2 words, per hectare, you will create degradation, deforestation, pollution, all the things that we don't want anymore. So the dilemma here and the belief system of maximization of return on investment needs a system change. We need to move away from this ideal that has been around for decades and centuries, just by putting or adding 2 words, per hectare. And then you create 4 losses. Maximization of return on investment per hectare creates 4 losses. So I turned that around and I thought, okay, that means that the word return is super important for everybody. Everyone understands the word return. Farmers, investors, governments, business people, entrepreneurs, ecologists even, they all understand the word return. So I used that anchor, the word return, to create the 4 returns framework. So each landscape should deliver inspiration, social capital, jobs, natural capital, biodiversity, and financial capital. And those 4 returns are the basis of an economic model that is sound from a landscape perspective. But the next question is, of course, how to do that. So you need to move to those landscapes themselves and identify a zoning system. You know, as an ecologist, I'm raised and trained, and I'm thinking in zones, because these ecosystems, you can consider ecosystems as a kind of landscape zones, natural landscape zones. But I mean something different. I mean that we need to create a language on the ground so people will understand where they live in, and they get an understanding of the ecosystem they are part of. So I decided to create 3 zones. Just by, you know, those zones are existing already, as you can see, it's nothing new, but by framing them into a new language. The economic zone are urban areas, infrastructure, and they deliver, you know, economic productivity, like, you know, process plants and so on. But monocultures are part of economic zones as well, because they're vulnerable and they deliver only one thing, maximizing of food or fibers per hectare. They don't maximize biodiversity, for instance. So economic zones are expanding everywhere in the world, urban areas and monocultures. Natural zones are becoming smaller and smaller in all over the world, because national parks are still there, but quite often not well protected due to lack of funding, and you have a lot of paper parks, as you will know. Indigenous communities who live in those places quite often are very vulnerable and are threatened by colonists and actions of conversion and mining. So the natural zone basically is the foundation of ecology and biodiversity. And the in-between zone, what I've called the combined zone, almost does not exist. You cannot find large combined zones in the world. But these zones need to expand. So the natural zones basically needs to strengthened and connected to other natural zones and places. The combined zone actually needs to expand on behalf of the monocultural economic zone. And what is the combined zone? The combined zone is the place where you combine productivity with biodiversity. And yes, this is possible. On a small scale, regenerative agriculture and agroforestry are pretty well known, and increasingly getting more attention, and that's good news. But we need to make sure that this combined zone of regenerative agriculture and agroforestry is, let's say, connected to an expansion and connectivity of the natural zone, while we also get to understand what it means to live and to work in the economic zone and to create sustainable practices in an economic zone as well. So you might think, oh, this sounds like very logical. And yes, it is. People know it already, and sometimes they use it at a small scale already, especially when they understand how landscapes are working, like here in Tamil Nadu in India. Those farmers were working with the Dan Foundation, a local NGO, for many years, and they're practicing this zoning approach already. They were using the combined zone with a regenerative agroforestry of coconut and rice and mango and sugarcane and so on. And they understood that the natural zone is critical for the survival of the combined zone and the economic zone. So they were using it already in a small scale. So 4 returns are delivered by 3 zones. But now we need to talk about time. Time is critical. And when I worked for IUCN and in the conservation world, we always had to deal with 5 or 4 years programs from governments or philanthropists, foundations. And, as you all know, that is not realistic. You cannot create those programs in 4 or 5 years. We need at least a generation to build together with local actors this work in the field. Just an example here from Spain, a holm oak of more than 500 years old, and a farmer who planted a holm oak tree only 30 years ago. And this is a very harsh environment, cold winters, very hot summers. So only a few months in the year you have a growing season. You can imagine that it takes a lot of time to rebuild a natural system in this place. So time is critical. So that's why I framed the 4 returns. So that's why I call this the 4 returns framework of holistic landscape restoration with a 3 zoning approach and a minimum time frame of 20 years. And I published it, put KPIs under it, key performance indicators, so that you can measure and monitor it over time. And in 2013, I started doing it. But how can you bring all those people together? Another practical mechanism was there out in the open, and that was called the Theory U. I've been working with the Theory U, which is an approach to co-create, a system approach to co-create visions and dreams in active plans. It has been developed by Otto Scharmer, a German guy who lives in the United States at MIT. And actually it is practiced by a lot of businesses already. So I use this co-creation tool in landscape to start. And we started with Commonland and started in places like here in Spain, an area of more than 1 million hectares, very degraded, very poor, where the farmers actually didn't know what to do anymore because of climate change. The rains were going down, a lot of erosion, deforested area. And we started to build through this Theory U approach, a 4 returns master plan. And you see in the middle of this map, you see a U, and you see also the year 2034. We started in 2014, and we are now underway. The farmers are organized. We set up companies. We are restoring the natural areas, connect the corridors, and so on, so on. So how does it work? In practice, when we started Commonland, we are still in the phase of testing this 4 returns concept now in 4 countries: the Netherlands, Australia, South Africa, and Spain. And I'm moving to other places, working with others like Red Cross in the Philippines and Green Releaf Initiative to see how we can move this further. Basically, you need to identify a place, or people or NGOs or farmers come to you and ask for assistance. And we create this landscape vision together with the key leadership in those areas. Then we start to do the mapping so that we can understand what to do where. And meanwhile, we work together to identify business development, business cases. That's step 4. And seek for the blended finance, the way how to fund all this, because that is critical, of course, as funding is always an issue. And as I said, now in 4 countries, we've built a proof of concept. We set up landscape partnership, that is the logos of the above line in those 4 countries. And we have set up and started companies in those places. That is like the Almendrahesa in Spain, or Grounded in South Africa, or Wide Open Agriculture in Australia, and Boeren van Amstel and 2 other companies in the Netherlands, all in very degraded areas, whether it's in the peatland system in the Netherlands, or the very dry deforested wheat belts in Australia, where they have deforested the area only 120 years ago, or the very dry and deforested watershed of Port Elizabeth in South Africa, and the Altiplano in Spain. Large areas, not too many people are living there, with the exception, of course, of the Netherlands, which is, as you probably know, a highly populated country. And the more populated the country is, the more difficult it is to get the alignment of stakeholders, as you probably can imagine. Spain, just an example. As I said, we started in 2014. We identified the economic zones in that huge place. You can see that the economic zone is pretty small, only some small villages and some small processes on agriculture stuff. The combined zone, or the potential of the combined zone, is huge. We have started with regenerative agriculture and with the company Almendrahesa that produces regenerative almonds, oil, olive oil, and increasingly also wine, and are now working also to help the national parks to create more corridors between the natural zones, so that we can restore watersheds, plant trees of native species where that is needed. This local team is working on it. and that's a similar process that we do in Australia. Although there it was a bit different than in Spain and the other places. Since in Australia we started first with a company. Why, you may imagine? It was difficult to set up a landscape partnership. First of all, because the country is big. There are not so many NGO or farmers. Yeah, there are a lot of farmers, but they don't like too much NGOs. They were in that time pretty conservative. But so that's why we started with a company to prove that regenerative agriculture in the combined zone was possible. And now we are also working with lots of university people, Aboriginal people, and local organizations to create natural zones, more attention for natural zones and tree planting. So we are teaming up, with the company and with the brand Dirty Clean Food to build this landscape, holistic landscape management in the countryside and get more and more attention for it. And the driver here is this company that was listed in 2018 and is becoming a huge success. So one of the last slides, I briefly explain the funding perspective for a landscape. If you look from a landscape, then you have funding needs. If you look from a funder perspective or an investor perspective, you have a different view on things. Development funding agencies, for instance, like overseas development, they have timelines of 4 to 5 years, and they have a set of criteria. The same thing is for investors. Investors have, of course, they don't give away money. They want to have a financial return. So one of the key questions they always ask, is what is the risk and what is the return? And if you say the return is 5% in 20 years, most of the investors are not too interested. If you say the return is 20% in 4 years with no risk, every investor, of course, will step into that. But the reality is different. So what we did is we changed the frame here and we said, okay, what is the need for a landscape? Now, the first thing you need for a landscape is to build trust. So you need to build a landscape partnership that is the driving force locally for a for returns approach within a landscape. That's the yellow line. And the yellow line always costs money. You need to pay people, you need to train people, you need to help local leadership, you need to help the local NGO, etc., etc., etc. That costs money. And you need to have the money for at least 20 years to build trust, because as we all know, building trust takes time, but trust can go away within one night or a day. So it is critical that this line is covered well, funded. The second thing is, the second line, the orange line, is that you need to start with restoring the natural zone and creating business development. Restoring the natural zone costs money as well. You can do it with subsidies, with carbon money probably, or with grants. Hopefully also with government subsidies, as I said. But meanwhile, you are doing that. In the yellow line, you also do start with business development. And if you can set up businesses or help change current businesses into a more regenerative mode, you enter the next line. And that's where the economics come in, where you can start with investing at landscape level, invest in regenerative companies or trading industries or agroforestry tool setting, whatever. But this all should be supported, and that is that is a very important thing, by governments. Governments can change purpose policies and subsidy systems, and governments can be a long-term ally if they enable this process and help. And that's why policy influencing is always important. And we published a report on this this year, a few months ago, on calculating the value of the for returns of a large-scale holistic landscape restoration setting together with KPMG, and you can download it on the website of Commonland. So, yeah, I think this is our last slide almost. We are an enabler, a catalyst, and an initiator. We started as an initiator, and we still do this as system change developer. Because we want to build a proof of concept. So we move from 4 to 8 countries where we want to work with local teams to do this. And hopefully in the future we can become more a catalyst so that others can use the tools And at a certain moment, we would love to have, and we are working on that, an online tool setting, a digital platform where everyone can be enabled to use this approach, because what we want is that the maximization of return on investment per hectare will stop at the end, and we create a new normal for landscaping based on a for returns approach. And of course, everyone can name it and use it and use the right wording to make sure it works in the local context. So you asked me, Sarah, to come up with some recommendations. And let me end this slide with some recommendations. As we all know, ecosystem restoration, that's what I think, is the most economic and effective way to prevent and bring down the dramatic effects of disasters and climate change. Programs of minimum 20 years should become the norm, not projects of 4 or 5 years. We need, of course, always build upon existing leadership. And so far, we've seen that the for returns framework creates alignment among local stakeholders and works in all landscapes. Long-term finance, as I've shown earlier, is needed to build trust and develop regenerative business cases. And we need to ask governments and philanthropists to work together to make this happen. And governments can play, or should play, a role as an enabler from a policy point of view, but also as a guarantor from a finance point of view, so that investors can come on board. But maybe I would like to conclude that we need in all sectors chief ecosystem officers, because that is really what's lacking at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Willem. That was really meaningful. Every time I watch a presentation on the for returns, it's always very affirming and also very timely and relevant to how to bring together solutions and make them more meaningful and have more impact. And just to summarize the two speakers with our question on how we can enable large-scale ecosystem restoration, we saw that there was a lot of emphasis on strengthening biodiversity and working with the natural ecosystem to meet the social and economic needs of the place, of the communities, and also to work together to bring bridges, to build bridges across sectors where the Oscar Lopez Center has been working with the government, with the business sector, as well as, also where Commonland is also using theory U to bring stakeholders together to work on the landscape. And in that process, the change process is a journey across in a collaboration. And also how we build through time and making sure that's an enabler as well. Lastly, also in the financing part, to be able to make sure we get to sustain the initiatives and also be able to find economic return and value so that people can also meet their needs as the way we value nature as well in our personal and collective needs. I just want to make sure that we have covered some questions because we have no more time for Q&A. I just want to acknowledge some comments here that Dr. Ed Mangaon of BSU saying the for returns can be approached and tried, perhaps seriously considered by the Philippine Environment Department. Thank you, Dr. Mangaon from BSU. And then we also have some questions here. What we can do is that maybe the speakers, if they have time, to answer it on the chat as we prepare the next speaker's introduction. The speakers can see the questions in the panel here. And then if I may invite Dr. Lasco and Willem to help us answer them by chatting on this side, if it's okay, given that the time is limited. But and then we also have one from Chad on what global regions do you feel are in the most desperate need of regeneration? And then lastly, on how to apply permaculture design using theory U. So, and with that, we thank our speakers and Dr. Lasco and Willem Ferweda for your time and wisdom in this panel. So we are moving on to the next panel, and I just want to check everyone's temperature. Everyone's okay so far. On the chat, if you're having challenges with the sound or audio, or the visuals, just let us know. Our team will be assisting. And then again, if you have questions, you can type it on the Q&A. But unfortunately, we could cover it earlier because of the time limitation. And we regret that we couldn't have it interactive for you. And we appreciate our speakers for helping guide if they have the time and chance to respond in the chat. If not, we can ask them by, and then we can forward it to you personally, to those who ask the questions, and put it also in the chat box later, or share it to you later during the speed networking if the speakers can share with us privately the answers. Thank you so much. So the next panel is on pandemic and climate solutions through biodiversity conservation. And this is with two amazing women, Attorney Ipat Luna and Dr. Annadel Cabanban. And to introduce them, I'll invite Benjamin.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a beautiful panel. And I'm very happy now to introduce for our second panel, environmental lawyer and consultant. For 3 decades, she has worked on law and policy for the environment and for social justice. She has been an executive trustee of Pusod Inc. and a consultant for Resources and Economics Foundation of the Philippines on a protected area financing project. She was also a member of the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. Currently, she is a consultant on policy development at the Office of the Deputy Secretary Legarda for what needs to be carried forward into a better normal. Please join me in welcoming Attorney Ipat Luna.
Thank you very much, the wind from the electric fans. Fixing my hair. Thank you very much for this invitation, and I've been really wanting to discuss sustainability in that sense, because life is not used to sustainability. We live, we die. Things in the earth change all the time, so these are not sustained. So regeneration is really a buzzword that should start to gain traction and gain ground. If I may already share my presentation. Here. Can everybody see this? Hello, is it better?
Yes, we can see it and hear you, but the sound is not so strong.
I'm sorry, what? Is that better sound?
This one is better, yes, thank you.
Okay. I'd just like to run through worldviews for ecosystem renewal in the world. Between the expansionist and the ecological worldview, society has gone towards the expansionist side, consumer society, satisfying of material wants, endless material growth as necessary for happiness, whereas the ecological worldview is a finite Earth worldview. No subsystem can exhibit endless growth. So there is already always an end point to the dreams of people if they dream of satisfying their material wants. Of course, there's the domination approach, which has roots in Genesis. No? It's anthropocentric, and there's the stewardship approach, and tribal or indigenous people will demonstrate that their care for the land is more of a stewardship rather than an ownership. Humans are seen as partners in natural processes rather than as masters. It's still kind of anthropocentric. There are also populist movements, community initiated, tied to a resource base, defined by place and culture. So in that sense, it's localized and important. But again, still quite anthropocentric. There's that field of biomimetics, principles of ecological design by Oasis, which follows nature's example, transcends market culture, context is king. So all of these 13 principles of environmental design, which I have tried to capture in towards the end of this presentation in a more easier to swallow format. There's animal rights and ecocentrism and biocentrism, which is life-centered, biodiversity becoming the highest ethical value in nature, and species and populations as basic units of biodiversity become the locus of inherent value. They're not valuable only because of our consumerist society, but they have an inherent value because of their role and their niches in the ecological system. There is the notion of the evolutionary directive as against the humanitarianism and the notion of siding with the oppressed as being part of your ecocentrism philosophy. There's the deep ecologists, Arne Nays, the 7 principles of deep ecology, which considers biospherical egalitarianism, equality among living beings, the diversity and the symbiosis among living beings. You've seen this earlier in the slide of another presenter, so I wouldn't have to explain it anymore. There's Murray Bookchin's social ecology, recognizing the interdependence of humans and nature, envisioning a world in which basic human needs are fulfilled through an economic restructuring that is environmentally sustainable, reconstructive, ecological, communitarian, and ethical. It seems to focus on institutional arrangements for society, but how does it interrelate with how nature functions left on its own? Part of social ecology is also Murray Bookchin, in which there are certain spheres of engagement. There's the sphere of ecofeminism, where a pluralistic and non-hierarchical relationship-oriented philosophy will suggest how humans could reconceive themselves and their relationships to nature in ways that do not dominate, enhancing the distinction of woman and her role in the earth cycles, particularly reproduction. And then there are the spiritual ecologists. Each tribe might have one, derives lessons from the natural world and its spirits and its messages, listens to the mountain, listens to the messages of the river, nativism, animism, land wisdom, all that sort of thing, which has gotten a bad rap in modern society. But actually, we have to listen more to these kinds of messages. And of course, sustainable development. I feel really old thinking about when this was actually started. The global trends in the environment, the black line is where we are. We really are at a crossroads, and the crossroads is forcing us to pick where we are going to go. And just this Wednesday, the UN released another report saying that instead of going down, global emissions are going up, and that the 2030 deadline for drastic action that the IPCC stated would actually have 200% more emissions. It's like you're riding in a speeding train, and instead of pushing on, and there's a brake at the rail at the end of the road, there's a cliff, and instead of putting on the brakes, you step on the accelerator. That's what we're doing in society today. There are the bioregionalists, my personal favorite, where you put power in its place. Loyalty to place translates to loyalty to community and the local economy, and it counters the amoral market by placing value where it intrinsically resides. This involves a kind of re-inhabitation. And the bioregionalists usually say resistance is fertile. And I like that it's kind of connected to the 4 returns that was discussed earlier. And then the political ones, the political greens, where ecology, grassroots democracy, social justice, and nonviolence are parts of a political philosophy of the green movement. For biological diversity, there's Jeffrey Sayers, who described the difference between market and value and homogeneity and diversity as the basis for progress. And if you look at the market and homogeneity, you would increase production, you would consider resources finite, whereas on the other end, you would increase the value of production rather than the actual volume of production. Community is prime and tasks are integrated. So is there room for a Philippine ecological worldview? Our biodiversity is so rich that, of course, there should be room for a Philippine ecological worldview. But it seems like lawlessness is so widespread, a regulatory agency like ours finds it hard to deal with everything all at once, because society has gone on a path in which, like I said, people are pressing on the accelerator, and we in the DNR and other agencies like ours will have to step on the brakes. And thankfully, Congress already recognized the climate emergency in a resolution adopted a week ago. So there's regulatory capture still, but if the first window in a building is not repaired, the people who like breaking windows will assume that no one cares about the building and more windows will be broken. Soon the building will have no more windows. But when this population, when humans today got on the planet, society was already organized such that it was already difficult to solve environmental problems. I recall when we had cleanups and the young people, the children that were helping us clean up were picking up everything. And we were saying, no, you just pick up the trash. And they could not determine which was trash and which was seaweed and other marine creatures. Because when they were born, this was already the environment they grew up in. So many do not see the problem. There's no recognition of limits. The principal operating unit is no longer family or church or school. It is now corporations. And then we always think there will be a technological fix. So we accept. No? We always say there is balancing, but the balancing leads us to 200% more emissions. So we are complacent. We make excuses, we say nothing, etc. Until we face cataclysm. There's already 3 major cataclysms. And so a Philippine worldview, I think, has to start not with an alarm bell being rung, but with initiating a new awe, an inspiration. And our biodiversity can generate that awe, because among the ratio of species per area of endemic plants, the Philippines is second in this list of hotspots. This is the February issue of Nature magazine. With 64.7, only after the eastern arc of coastal forests of Tanzania and Kenya, which is huge. The Philippines is the second smallest, but we have a high ratio of endemic plants and a high ratio of endemic vertebrates. And we also have the Coral Triangle, some of the highest levels of invertebrate species. Let me show this quickly. This is Southeast Asia 15 million years ago. Some of you might recognize Palawan, Mindoro, Taiwan, and the Indo-Chinese Peninsula. 50 million years ago, I'll move this quickly, and you have to watch the black lines with triangles are the tectonic plates. And you see Luzon came up only 45 million years ago from under the sea. So 40 million years ago, Luzon is moving up, and the sea is starting to claim some of the peninsula. The pink parts are trenches. So as you can see, that plate is actually tilted so that there's a trench on one side and Luzon came up on the other. And as you can see, Palawan is still part of the mainland. Zamboanga is still not part of Mindanao. And 6 million years ago, it met up with Mindanao. And Mindoro has always been an island. And I think the insights from this model is we as an archipelago, we were meant to be together. Other than that, there is a geologic and evolutionary explanation to our diversity. But climate change and corresponding sea level rise will devastate our ecosystems and therefore our societies. We will no longer have cohesive communities because we will compete with each other for food. The timelines of our consciousness are also severely limited. This is only 50 million years, but this map, but you know, this Earth is much older than that. But our impact on the Earth is much shorter. So to escape the current rut, our society would need to redefine its relationship with nature. So the first one is we have to renew that awe, and we can only renew that by looking at how unique the Philippines is and how much of the biodiversity there remains, and how we can relate to that biodiversity. And there are already communities of practice all over the internet where people share their biodiversity pictures and share their experiences. And while we look around with new eyes, we have to re-inhabit and connect what we eat with what we plant, connect what we drink with the watershed that provides that water to us. So anybody who lives in Manila that doesn't look at Ipo watershed and its dam and La Mesa watershed will not be looking at how he will be provided with water for the coming generations or even for the coming decades. So we need to look with new eyes. And I just like to show this because we have to evolve by looking at food waste as treasure and putting that in bins so that we can put it in a bokashi so that it can become soil instead of throwing that together with everything else in a landfill where it actually makes that landfill leak. Something simple that I asked my staff to devise for my sink, you just step on the piece of wood. It's a very simple mechanism. You step on the piece of wood to make the water come out, so you don't have to let the water run for certain things that you are not using it for. So these are just re-inhabiting by knowing that you are building new soil, that you are conserving the water, because you know that Ipo watershed will not provide that much water in the long run for all the population that will be inhabiting Manila in the future. So we have to save water. We need to learn where the floods are coming from, understand floodplains, learn your water and food sources and your risks. And of course, diversify. This is a Tangisang Bayawak tree and just in Quezon National Park. If we diversify, we first look at where we can look at diversity so we can recognize what it means. Because right now, we don't know diversity. Because of all the cement all around us, we don't know what it looks like. And happiness and contentment where you are. A place-based, bioregionalist happiness and contentment. Sunsets, a warm breeze, just regularly hearing the air, the wind on the leaves. These are the types of things that bring happiness and contentment. And then, so awe, re-inhabitation, and then we build the resistance. We have to plumb the depth of our resistance. And I'd like to invite you to think of resistance with another meaning, and that is resisting what we have come to accept as the way to do things, the way to go to the toilet. So we flush our waste with water, we despoil the water, and we despoil the environment because we don't really dislodge our septic tanks that often, or it doesn't go into proper septic systems. Instead, we can look at urine diverting toilets, getting the waste, drying it, and making it fertilize our trees, if not our food. Some simple and complicated solutions. This will be a plastic or fiberglass diverting toilet that can actually collect your waste. You just put ash or soot or sawdust, and the waste will dry and it will no longer smell. So there are ways to do this. This is Bayawan, and it's actually a field where wastewater goes through so that it is cleaned and it is reused. And we have to think of what is enough. This is a normal thing that you see. It's a picture from DSL. It's a snake swallowing another reptile. And if it eats that, it will be content for a long time. But while it is digesting that, it will be easy prey for other creatures, particularly humans who want to kill snakes. We need to see what is enough for us. And when we swallow a big thing, we need to rest. We need to slow down. And we need to understand what is enough. May kabubusugan, the feeling of being full. And finally, the fourth, so that was reinhabitation and, sorry, I forgot the, reinhabitation and resistance. And finally, community, bayan. We are a spaceship. We need to act as if we are on a spaceship and not being provided infinitely with all of our needs. We have to have a sharing economy with community cooperation, because competition will just drive us towards using up more and more that we don't really need. We need to have solidarity, especially with the oppressed. No, this is just a picture of assistance that I have provided to an indigenous community that is facing conflicts. And we need to be ungovernable by foreign power or an unfit government, ungovernable and anarchistic. And I don't mean that in a sense of being a rebel. I mean that in the sense of resistance is fertile. This is kangkong, lettuce, blue ternate, which I can harvest on my rooftop. And you can see the solar panel also. We can make ourselves ungovernable by being not just resilient, but being sufficient unto ourselves as far as possible. So these days, when I'm asked in the days of climate crisis, how are you? So I reply, so. Maraming salamat po. I hope those four things, inspiring awe, build a reinhabitation, building resistance, and communitarian approaches will be the way that we build our communities in the future.
Thank you, Attorney Luna. That was so inspiring. I just want to express my regret. I forgot to introduce Paula Barasturi, who is the moderator for this panel, and in just my distraction with our time earlier with the Q&A. And I want to introduce her formally first, and to support this panel with Attorney Luna and Dr. Cabanban. Attorney Paula Barasturi is a lawyer and environmental writer, and is the proprietor of Down to Earth Farms. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Sarah. And hello, Attorney Ipat. I saw.
Hi, Paula. Just call me Ipat. Paula supplied my barrel for my kangkong.
Yes, that was nice to see. Thank you for your awe-inspiring talk. And from that, I will remember the four things you said. So we have to look at nature and the way we live with new eyes. And maybe I can add to that with a new heart and also with new hands, because that's what I got from your talk. So re-inhabit and then resist the normal. And also to always remember that we live in a spaceship with finite resources, and so community is also key. So do we ask the questions now, or do we move on to our next speaker, Sarah?
We move on to the next speaker, and then we can do Q&A after. Thank you so much, Paula. And Benjamin can introduce Dr. Cabanban.
All right. Benjamin, you can introduce.
Yes.
Dr. Cabanban.
Thank you, Paula. Good to see you. Our next speaker on pandemic and climate solutions through biodiversity conservation is the Philippines country representative of Wetlands International and program manager of the Partners for Resilience project. She was the co-chair of the Large Marine Ecosystem and Open Oceans Working Group and a member of the regional team on the South China Sea Impact Evaluation Study of the Global Environment Facility. She is a member of the Oceans Knowledge Action Network of Future Earth and committed to supporting science-based and integrated management of our river basins and coastal zones. Let us welcome Dr. Annadel Cabanban.
Thank you. May I share my screen now?
Yes, you may, Dr. Cabanban.
Is it working? All right. Okay, now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I'm with Wetlands International, as mentioned, and the role of Wetlands International is to support governments, especially those who are signatories, that are signatories to the Convention on Wetlands. And our mandate is to safeguard and restore wetlands. Wetlands, just to summarize, are lakes, rivers, swamps, mangrove forests, seagrass beds, shallow coral reefs. Climate change impacts our country very often. In fact, we are in the top 4 of countries that are at risk. For climate change, the most disastrous is the increased rainfall, increased hot and dry days, and especially so with the advent of the hot heating up of the ocean waters, especially from the Pacific. Typhoons are created. There's about 20 that are created and passing through or impacting the Philippines. And we are on the track of typhoon. 3 or 4 typhoons land in the Philippines. So these hazards affect our people. And as mentioned by several speakers already, we have suffered from succeeding back-to-back typhoons. And in the Cagayan River Basin, there was severe flooding and loss of life and property. I was fortunate to be able to listen the lecture of Professor Tabias of the University of the Philippines. It was an hour-and-a-half lecture, and certainly I cannot summarize this today, but I learned so many things. And why was it flooding so much in the Cagayan River? And these are some of the reasons. The forest is denuded. The mountain range in the river basin is steep. So when rainfall falls, it goes directly down and it goes to the floodplains, it goes to the river, and the floodplain is now covered with agricultural land, agricultural farms, and some settlements. So these no longer serve as storage of water. And the river that runs from south to north here is also sedimented. This is also the result of logging, and the topsoil is released and flow into the tributaries and into the river, making the river shallow. So the water flows more towards the inundation area. And here you can see that the opening of the Cagayan River to the Babuyan Channel is so narrow. And not only that, it was also highly sedimented, it's shallow. So this whole area became a dam of rainwater that poured for several days in the northern part of Luzon due to Typhoon Ulysses. So a similar thing occurred in the Bicol region. And if you have watched or read the newspapers or listened to the radio, you would hear the impacts of the floodwaters, the rainwater in the 5 provinces of the Bicol region. For instance, in the Camarines Sur province, waist-deep floodwaters were found. In Cabanban province, some areas were submerged in floodwater. Some waters overflowed to from nearby river, and there were landslides in Albay because there's Mount Mayon there, volcano that has spewed some lava and lahar before. These could trigger lahar flow and impact the provinces, the barangays in the provinces. And as a result of this, over 3,500 families were displaced or have to be evacuated or go to evacuation centers. Why is this happening? And when you look at the environmental profile that was produced by the government, Bicol Regional Development Plan for 2017 to 2022, it says that forest management needs to improve in the region. And also flooding is occurring in the Bicol River Basin. And just to pick out some of the recommendations that were in this report that's relevant to our talk today, we need to address the continuous degradation, deterioration of the environment, ensure that the natural resources are managed well, and ensure that adaptive capacities and resiliency of the ecosystem and communities are strengthened. This photo here is a photo from the DNR Region 5 website, and it shows that still there's some illegal logging occurring. There are also other issues that prevail in the region. There's low compliance to environmental policies. There's solid waste management that needs to be followed strictly. And because if not, then it clogs the river. And there's also the Mining Act, which needs to be followed so that there's no severe sedimentation in the rivers. There's lack of technical capacities in our offices that need to manage our environment. And we need to coordinate, we need to harmonize, we need to work together and ensure that the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation programs are working together across the levels of government. Again, this is also from the Regional Development Plan of the Bicol region. So what can we do? And a hydrologist told me this as a response to reduce flooding in our environment. These are very general, practical responses that we can employ in our 18 major river basins in the Philippines so that we don't suffer this kind of flooding and loss of life and property. Number one, we can restore our forest in the watershed. This is what's called the sponge effect. The trees, the roots of the trees absorb the rainwater, the topsoil absorbs the rainwater filters down into the groundwater, and it is our source of water. And we can also clear the easement, maintain the riparian forest. By law, this is 20 meters on each side of the riverbank. On average, this is the area or the width by which rivers swell, inundate. And so this area should be clear, should be covered with natural vegetation and absorb the rainwater, the floodwater, and ensure that the downstream will not be affected. This is what's called the room for the river approach. We give room for the river to swell, to inundate. Thirdly, we can maintain or construct oxbow lakes along the river. These are there are natural impoundments along the river that will hold the rainwater, the floodwater temporarily, and it can then be, the floodwater then slows down and doesn't rush down to communities downstream. Fourthly, we need to clear the riverbed of blockage. Number one I mentioned is the sediment. This comes from the forest that's been denuded. There's debris, maybe parts of trees or households or transportation and so on. And of course, the common thing is garbage. So this is what I call let the flood flow fast to sea. The number one technique here, the sponge effect, is good when the rain is only light. The second and number three approach is useful when the rainfall is moderate. It's not so strong, but when the rain is so strong, just like what we experience, or long, just like when we experienced with Typhoon Ulysses, we need to have rivers, a river that is clear of sediment, debris, so that it flows fast to sea. Now, all of these levels of rainfall we experience now in the Philippines. And in fact, probably with more of the strong rains. So we need to have all these measures in our 18 major river basins to ensure that our people will be safe and secure living along stream, down midstream, or downstream in the deltas. This is an example of a natural storage of water. This is Agusan Marsh. This is in the middle of the Agusan River in Agusan, Mindanao. But several also along the way, there are oxbow lakes in Agusan River. But we can also construct lakes that will hold temporary storm water or rainfall. So what are the projects of Wetlands International with our partners here in Mindanao, in the Philippines, to reduce the risk to flooding? I'll mention two, and the Reach the Coast Rain to Top project. This is in Cagayan de Oro River Basin in Mindanao. There are several work packages in this project, but the package that we are responsible for is work package 2, which is to reduce the risk to flooding. This package is actually a combination of and cooperation of 3 agencies or 3 groups. Rainforestation by the Cabanban Foundation Incorporated. This is the arm of CSR, if you may, corporate social responsibility, arm of fruit plantation, and hydrological modeling and decision support tool. That's a role. And we need this model and decision support tool to influence or to be the basis of lobbying by the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council to promote payment for ecosystem services. We promote this scheme of payment to compensate for the benefits, not just depend on the government's contribution to environmental management and restoration. So may I just explain a little bit of the Reach the Coast Rain to Top project? This project is actually a response of Typhoon Sendong. If you remember this is known as Typhoon Washi internationally. And you can see on the left side of the frame of the slide, you can see severe stream event over denuded forest. This results to poverty and sedimentation down the river, impacting on the water district and the people living downstream in Cagayan de Oro City. What we want to do is to not just restore the water infrastructure, the people connected to good water service, but we want to ensure that the environment upstream will be able to reduce the risk to flooding. So it's basically catchment restoration. And the method that we use is what Cabanban Foundation calls rainforestation. It's a combination of 2 components. Rainforestation, ecological component is the shading of cogon grass. This is cogon grass on the slopes of the mountain and hills. I took this photo, and to ensure that trees will grow, we need to first kill, if you may, shade over the cogon grass with calyandra. This photo here, it looks like ipil-ipil. And once the calyandra tree has grown and overshaded and killed the cogon grass, then is the time for native trees such as nara, toog, and other trees are planted. And this produces a very good result in the rainforestation, the forestation of the forest. And this is this is a comparison in Huancayo. This is in Agusan River. And before and after comparison, you can see 2017, the riverbank was eroded, but in 2019, after the planting of the grass along the riverbank, it has stabilized. And in the ecological economic part of the zone, again, there's an improvement in 2019. And in Talocogan, this is another example of the denuded forest, and we planted this with coffee, and it has grown. The second project that we have is this project in the Agusan River Basin. We piloted the forest landscape restoration and riparian buffer zone restoration. And this is the forest landscape restoration schematic diagram. We planted native trees here. And in between shrubs, these ones are coffee or cacao trees. These areas are planted to maize, corn, and vegetables. So with this schematic growing of native trees and root crops, the slope is stabilized and prevents erosion. Along the riverbank, we have, as I mentioned, the 20-meter is the inundation zone. The first 10 meters, we planted first with grass closest to the river, and then shrubs and trees, native trees. And then in the economic zone, that's where the local people can plant bananas, corn, coffee, and whatever else that will bring them cash for their livelihood. Another background or view of this riparian buffer zone restoration. Here's the grass, the trees, native trees, the banana cacao, and fruit trees. So ecological zone and economic zone. So people also benefit from the restoration, not just from the ecology, the change, improvement of the environment, but also from the economic situation. So what are the current projects of Wetlands International with partners? We are also building a project called Building with Nature in Asia Initiative. This is with IKI, or the Climate Commission of the German government. Building with Nature is a nature-based solution to flooding and drought. It uses natural processes such as the river inflow, the sedimentation rate. It also uses natural processes such as the growth of trees, like the native trees I mentioned, the mangrove trees, and grasses that can hold the ground. It uses also animals like bottom-dwelling animals such as oysters, clams, and other water-dwelling animals along the coast. Of course, building with nature is in consideration or in discussion with the community. We also are working not just in the landscape, but also in the seascape. We are assisting, participating in the Manila Bay Sustainable Development Master Planning. Wetlands International is a member of the Partners for Resilience project, and we are part of that expert team in formulating this Manila Bay Sustainable Development Master Plan. This master plan is the technical assistance of the Dutch government to the Philippine government. And within this master plan, this draft one, there is a coastal protection strategy in which we are very keen to support when it's going to be finalized. We want to employ the building with nature in this coastal zone protection strategy for the protection and reduction of risk to flooding. And we have this as a proposal to ICI. And this is basically a scaling up also of the work that was done in Demak, Indonesia. We want to scale it up for adaptation, acceleration in Asia. Complementing this is the mangrove restoration. This is basically the reversion of abandoned, undeveloped, and underproductive fish ponds. With a proposal to plant or not to plant project, we propose this to Common. And this restoration of mangrove is really based on science, it's based on restoration ecology. This is the situation in the northern coast of Manila Bay. You can see the red area, that's the urban area that will be in 2040. The darker red area are the areas that are going to be flooded or already being flooded. The hatch area here is the area that's subsiding. It's subsiding by a range of 0.5 to 4.5 centimeter per year. The subsidence is due to the over extraction of water for domestic and industrial use or agricultural use. And sea level rise is about 1 centimeter per year. So in short, the subsidence is greater than the sea level rise. But as a result of both these subsidence and sea level rise, this hatch area is chronically flooded. And some experts think that this area is so difficult or too expensive to protect. And so there is this line, white line here, or line of defense. There's already a temporary dike here that protects the people living here in this area. So what needs to be done here, this line of defense, again, in a different view. This is the Bulacan area, and this is the Pampanga area. This blue area here, in the past, is actually covered with mangroves, but now it's no longer covered with mangroves, but it's more covered with fish ponds. So what do we plan to do to assist the local governments and the Philippine government in the restoration of this area to protect the people from flooding, severe flooding, and to protect biodiversity? These areas here, encircled in red, are key biodiversity areas. These are very important for migratory birds that pass through the Philippines. And following the general measures that I mentioned to you earlier, the watershed here needs to be protected. This is beyond the map here. The river here is constricted. It's constricted with so many fish ponds. We need to clear and give easements, the correct easements as required by law, to make the river flow naturally to the sea. This is Manila Bay here. And Also, the mangrove trees here, the mangrove forest can be restored. The fish ponds here that are no longer productive, producing less than 3 tons per hectare, need to be converted back or reverted back to mangrove forests. Again, there's a law that covers these. And so these areas here in green are areas of mangroves stands that we think need to be restored to protect this area. And here the light blue line here can be strengthened to make it using permeable dams, using natural processes that will keep the sediments, keep the tree propagules, mangrove propagules, so that it will regrow and protect the areas behind. So what are our next steps? We hope that we will be able to work closely with the local governments of Bulacan, for instance, Hagonoy, and also Cabanban, in working, piloting, as well as looking at the whole landscape and ensure that the coastal zone will be the delta, the Parangal Delta will be secure, safe for people to subsist or to visit or to recreate. And so we have 5 regional projects that we want to apply or implement here in the Philippines. One is the Building with Nature. I mentioned 2 areas, the landscape and the seascape. We can also apply this in urban areas. The other is the resilient cities. We want to conserve urban wetlands and construct urban wetlands so that we can store storm water. For instance, there's so much water flowing during rainy season. We can keep those and use them for for dry, long, hot, dry days. And we also have a project which we call carbon stores. We want to conserve our peatlands or peat swamps, mangrove forests. These are ecosystems that hold a lot or sequester a lot of carbon, and releasing them or destroying these ecosystems will release the carbon and contribute to the heating up of our environment. So the other is the flyway bottlenecks. I mentioned the key biodiversity areas in Manila Bay. These are part of the East Asian Australasian flyway, and we need to protect, conserve the habitats so that the birds will be able to continually come, feed, refuel before they continue their travel to Australia or New Zealand. And of course, the Himalayan water tables or towers is not really relevant to us here. It's in Central Asia. So I hope that I was able to give you an outline of what Building with Nature is, what that is a nature-based solution that can restore ecosystems, restore the services that we want, particularly the protection from flooding, the absorption of water, the slowing down of water flow, and the restoration of coastal wetlands, especially using these permeable wetlands, as I mentioned, which are made of tree trunks that allow water to go in and out. This is along the coast, but it traps the sediments as well as traps the seeds of mangrove trees so that it grows over here. So I want to thank our partners in the field, the farmers of Agusan, the and Lirongan in Bukidnon. We have worked with the indigenous peoples of Mindanao, and we're very pleased that with participation and cooperation of the local governments of Caloocan and Moncayo, we were able to demonstrate nature-based solution to restore the riverbank and the slopes, and hopefully if we secure more resources, we will be able to scale our efforts within the whole river basin and along the coast. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabanban. Thank you for reminding us how we are already suffering from climate change effects, and also, more importantly, for giving us examples of nature-based solutions that are already in place and that we can still do to restore ecosystem services. As we are running out of time, we do have some questions for our speakers, but we do not have much time. So may I ask Attorney Ipat and Dr. Cabanban if it's okay that you just reply to the questions through the chat box, the Q&A. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. And Benjamin will be introducing our next speaker.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
To conclude this insightful roundtable, we would love to be inspired by the Commissioner of Global Commission on Adaptation and representative for the Lone District of Antique House of Representatives. She was a former senator and the chairperson of the Committees on Finance, Foreign Relations, and Climate Change. She was also a global champion of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, focusing on resilience, and a champion on national adaptation plans of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Recognized as a global leader for tomorrow by the World Economic Forum, please join me in welcoming Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda.
Good afternoon to all of you. And I was listening in to many of the presentations. And in fact, I was advised that I could actually comment or summarize, but it was really a learning experience to be able to see all the experts working on the ground and really seeing how they work with local communities. Let me just perhaps remind everyone, because it is not for me as lawmaker to actually give my expert opinion to all the scientists and the experts who actually work with communities on the ground. But let me just state that we all know that the Philippines is a vulnerable country. And as legislator, I've endeavored in my past 3 terms as senator and my 1 term now as representative of the Lone District of Antique, which itself is a vulnerable province in this vulnerable nation archipelago of 108 million people, that we are not lacking in laws. Our laws have been enacted, and all we need to do is to ensure that these laws are funded, but funding is not sufficient and not enough, that these laws are actually known to people and that the laws are effectively implemented by the agencies of government. And I'm glad that the DNR is one of the organizers of this event. I also take note that we have co-presenters, the DNR, the Oscar Lopez Center, the IUCN, Wetlands International, and of course, Down to Earth Farms. It is important that everyone realizes how the process of legislation that takes years. And so we must value all the laws that we have. And I think the Philippines is one great repository of environmental and climate change laws, if I may state. And I cannot explain each and every law, although I authored it since 1998. Let me just go one by one. That's the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law. I keep on saying that this is such an important law for every community, every barangay, every household to implement. And if we actually ecologically segregate our waste at source, recycle, and compost, then I would dare say that minimum 1/2 of the problems we have on flooding, on communities whose lives and livelihoods have been washed away by raging flood waters, or by flooding not caused only by rains, but by debris, which is stuck in canals and esteros and roadside ditches. So the segregation of waste at source, recycling, and composting was written in 1998. I passed it as a young senator in 2001. It's been 19 years, and I believe only 25% or less of our local governments are actually implementing this. What does it say? There is a lack of understanding. There is a lack of political will. There's a lack of lifestyle change on the people who must benefit from this, who are the communities themselves. So why would a local community want to not segregate its waste at source, recycle, and compost when they actually can make money from being zero waste, when actually they could be doing preventive flooding from communities which live near each other in informal settler areas? But if they segregated waste at source, recycle, and compost, then the floods would not be as high as it was in Marikina, as it was in many areas of Metro Manila, in Southern Tagalog, in Central Luzon, even in Cagayan and Isabela. Second, the Clean Air Act, we all know that, not being followed. We have the Clean Water Act, where even our water concessionaires must be able to do their wastewater treatment by now. But sometimes they say they would rather pay and lose the cases in court than comply with the law. I'm not certain if that is still the position of our water providers, but that was the reason given way back in the Senate when I conducted an oversight hearing, because during my time, there were committees on the oversight of each of these laws. Oversight Committee on the Clean Air Act, Oversight Committee on the Clean Water Act, and Oversight Committee on the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. Those three laws are so essential. Let me go to the fourth, Environmental Education Awareness Act. That means the DepEd. That means our SUC, state universities and colleges, middle school. That means the K-12 must be embracing everything we're discussing. All our experts present here today, all these webinars must be utilized by our public schools and private institutions as well. Fifth, we have the renewable energy law and transitioning to a renewable energy pathway and veering away from dirty and now expensive fossil fuel that is harmful to the health, environment, to livelihood, and our future must be a no-brainer. And I can see, however, that there is some light in this direction, with the Department of Energy stating a few months back that there will be no permits given or no to new coal. But we ask, how many permits were given to coal that is not yet set up? But believe me, that will be a stranded asset, but that will be a different issue altogether. These are just five. How about the Climate Change Act created the Climate Change Commission and the People Survival Fund, which is a little known law that actually is a smaller version of the Green Climate Fund, which is an adaptation fund for local governments and communities to avail of, which was funded during my time for 1 billion pesos, and 6 local governments have availed of it. Our last speaker, very, very enlightening, spoke about if they had more resources. Yes, you have the resources. It is the duty of the Climate Change Commission and the PSF to make known the funds available so that everyone, not just LGUs, but also POs, CSOs, SUCs, may avail of these funds. Then, of course, we have the NIPAS, National Integrated Protected Area System. Attorney Ipat knows that very well because she and Mundita Lim, who's then the head of the BMB, Biodiversity Management Bureau, which Asik Rick Calderon now heads, I believe, knows this very well. We should treat our protected areas, 94 covered by the ENIPAS and 13 ahead in 1992. So more than 100, actually. We should treat them with care because they must be protected just like babies are protected. And so all the expertise of Wetlands International, of all the presentations that were made today can be put together. That can be a template for how our protected areas can be run, of how the DNR should have an oversight body to see, which is actually the BMB, and how the PAMBs can run and can conserve and protect their protected areas. And even if the protected areas of our countries, whether terrestrial or marine, have been legislated or not, the local governments can actually take the initiative to enact local legislation, provincial ordinances or municipal or city ordinances to protect their mangrove areas, to protect their plains, to protect their wetlands, to protect their mountains, if the national has not taken note of it. We see what has happened, sadly, unfortunately, in Cagayan, Isabela, and many other areas which are not mentioned in the news, including small provinces like Quirino and even Aurora, and the floods in Central Luzon, as well as Southern Tagalog and Metro Manila as well, how it took some time for the water to subside. And as we know, it is not just one reason. It could be the dam protocols which are not updated, which are not clearly communicated to the communities to the last mile. Hanggang sa barangay, sa purok, sa sityo, sa bahay. In the most relatable, communicated simply, early warning systems. Then we see also how the degradation, all the illegal activities, whether illegal logging, illegal mining, illegal quarrying, all the illegal activities in the many years past and decades past in the Sierra Madre, from way up north up to the Sierra Madre mountain range in the Pasig Marikina area, has taken its toll way back in 2009 in Ondoy and now in Ulysses. And believe me, it will worsen just like climate change. It will become more intense, widen, and worsen. Why? Because we have degraded it. Because all the illegal activities are now taking its toll on the environment, taking its toll on the mountains and on the rivers, which causes soil erosion and siltation and so flooding ensues so easily and quickly. I don't have to lecture the experts in our midst. I am stressing the point that we must treat every community as a protected area and a conservation area, even if it is not declared as such. I'm not saying everything is untouchable, because there must be clear coexistence between humans and the environment, but it is to our benefit that we care for it, taking into consideration all the laws I mentioned: clean air, clean water, ecological solid waste, renewable energy law, environmental education awareness, People Survival Fund, renewable energy law, and the Climate Change Act, and the ENIPAS, and the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Law. 9 laws I authored from 1998 till 2019. And as I speak to you now, in the House of Representatives, I have other pending measures which are filed, not yet passed on third reading, but equally good as the 9 laws I authored in the Senate. And one of that is actually very simple and Attorney Paula Aberasturi knows that because she helped draft it when I was in the Senate, and that's the Forest Garden Act. If only that was passed in the Senate and implemented by the Department of Interior and Local Government and the Department of Agriculture, then the pandemic would have happened and people would be growing their own food. Then we don't have to give and think and have the canned goods mentality. Then we don't need sachets and small containers. Then we will have to grow, we could grow our own food in our backyards, in our communities, even in recycled bote, lata, plastic, as I always say. So why did I have to mention all my laws? Because all the policies are in place. We have the greatest minds in our country, but why are we this way? Because what we need to do is to make sure that the science we know, the policies we do, the knowledge we are sharing today must be communicated in the simplest, relatable term to those who need it most, the least, the last, the needy, and the lost. The vulnerable sectors must understand all the art cards and video numbers and statistics and policies that we say and do in webinars. And that is a challenge to all of us, to be able to translate this knowledge, this science, to the people who are most affected. And at this point, we cannot say that a portion of the Philippines is vulnerable. We are all vulnerable, and we know that. We are all vulnerable in one sense or the other. And so in the midst of this pandemic, I simply want to say that all these laws and the enactment and effective implementation of all the environmental laws that we have done, that I have authored since 1998, is the right pathway towards a sustainable economic COVID recovery for the Philippines. So the COVID-19 pandemic recovery must be aligned, attuned to the climate pathway. There is no other way. We cannot go back to business as usual. We cannot go back to the old norm. We must go to the new norm. We must understand that the new norm means the implementation of all the 9 environmental laws I mentioned to you that have been there since 1998, that have been funded. But I dare say, even in the presence of a DNR, that you have been sorely lacking in the implementation of all these laws, including the National Greening Program. I am sorry, but this would not happen if we had better, stronger, more effective implementation of our laws. And it's not to blame one person or one group. All I'm saying is that perhaps government has failed miserably in exercising its oversight function in its implementation of all the laws we have authored. When I say government, some executive departments could do better. And I say this to challenge those in the executive, and this includes local governments as well. It is not easy, but who said it was easy? Just like it is not easy to enact a law. And I will not accept the reason that the laws that we author are idealistic laws that cannot be implemented. No, because in each law I mentioned, there are outstanding local governments that is implemented. That means it is doable. That means it can be done. That means all it takes is really the mind and the heart and the political will to do. So I decided not to read my speech. I decided to speak from the heart and to put together all the messages today so that I could urge those who are here today, so that I could inspire those who are not yet inspired, so that I could actually cause some change, positive change for our people. With that, I thank all of you for having me as your closing speaker. Let my brief message serve as a challenge, hopefully an inspiration. I did not mean to cut down any agency of government or any group. I simply wanted to say that we have collectively failed in the implementation of our laws, because otherwise this disasters in our midst would not have happened. And so you and I can continue to join hands and help the most vulnerable communities in the pandemic recovery, in the climate recovery, which should be attuned with each other. Thank you very much. And it's still afternoon. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda. It is our honor to have you here and also to hear from your heart, and such a powerful closing. It was so, for me, in many levels, hearing you speak at the UN climate conferences and also hearing you speak locally. You always speak from, this dedication to speak for the vulnerable. And for me, I'd like to close this event by inviting everybody to take a moment to think about the most vulnerable sectors who are affected by the climate crisis and the pandemic. We'll take a few seconds to do that, and also just to process what Deputy Speaker Legarda spoke and expressed. And then I felt like I was also moved by how she spoke from the heart, and that we should close with that instead of saying a speech that would, bring us back to too much in the head. And I think if you could just do that for a few seconds, and then we will close. And by acknowledging that, we brought them in this circle. Despite that, it was a lot about knowledge and information and wisdom and best practices. At the end of the day, is it relatable to them? Is it something we can bring to them? Something that would help them? And in the end, also help us, because we all are affected by this. And so collectively, we hope we can move forward together. So to close, we'd love to acknowledge the speakers, Deputy Speaker Legarda, for your heartwarming message and powerful reminders. Ambassador Saskia de Lang, the ambassador from the Netherlands Embassy in the Philippines. We also had ASEC Ricardo Calderon from DANR, Dr. Rodel Lasco from Oscar Lopez Center, Willem Ferweda from Commonland in the Netherlands, Dr. Annadel Cabanban from Wetlands International, Attorney Ipat Luna from the Office of Deputy Speaker Legarda. I thank Paula Barasturi, who was my co-moderator, and Benjamin Bernabella from Kayumangi Organic for helping us co-host this event. We also thank the people from the Embassy of the Netherlands, Patricia Albanida and Kevin Punzalan, who has graciously supported us along the way with this work, and also the team behind Green Releaf and the Food Gardens movement who made this event possible. We thank Little Rock Entertainment for generously helping us with the tech for this event, and Wise All for our promotions, and Tati Noblaza for all our social media. We thank everybody, the farmers, gardeners, biodiversity conservationists, government, civil society, social entrepreneurs, students, researchers, even people from other parts of the world for joining us this afternoon. It has been our pleasure to host and hold space, and we hope this is not the only space. We will be having more events the next few weeks, and we'll be having a consultation on regenerative food ecosystems in the country together with Commonland, our partner, and we will be inviting one of their ecosystem ambassadors, John Liu, who is one of the leading spokespersons on ecosystem restoration. Next week on December 11, we will send an invite to that. And so with our thanks to everybody, we are also inviting those who join and register. You're welcome to join a speed networking event in another room that we have sent by email. and to engage you further if you want to speak more and meet the other people who joined this event. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.
You.
Thank you.